starting these things is always the tricky bit, isn't it? Do you find that with your cup of cares?
No, well, it's
No.
just having a chat, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
that's basically what we're doing. So, you know, it's just such a big, well, use Janet's word, it's a hot potato.
As she said, yeah.
So, you know,
So
that's.
you emailed Janet to ask her.
I emailed her
what
last
do you think
night.
about nursing pay?
Yes. Well, you saw my email that I sent her.
Yeah.
So I just thought, well, I needed to do quite a few things with her because we hadn't booked our next session yet. So I was just thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, because by the time we get to the end of the month, it will be so even more topical because there will, you know, things will be happening. That I thought, well, we might as well make that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me that if I involved her in our discussion now, even though she wasn't actually physically there, we could like expand on that at the end of the month too.
Okay.
So that was the idea. And so I just, because she's so brilliant, she's so eloquent as well with it. You know, she's got, because she's a mature student, she comes from lots of different places in her perspective, and she's also been in career a career advisor as well. So I mean, she took me through a very enlightening conversation about student debt on our last conversation, which actually blew my mind because she made me realize that she said to me, Nikki, it's not debt. Think about it as a tax. It's a tax. And it was just really shifted my whole thinking. And that's quite interesting because we'll probably go back to that because I was just reading some information that they're about to change the, I'm not quite sure what they are changing, but for 23 and 24, they're going to change the way it's paid back, which will actually make it even more difficult for nurses. They'll be even worse off.
We're going to talk about that, I think, in this conversation, aren't we?
Yes.
Training, bursaries, or lack of.
Yeah.
So I thought, I really like her emails. So I thought I'd just pick out some key points that she has raised, and then we can just talk about that. So it's almost like Janet's part of the discussion, really. It's just she's not here.
Yes.
But so you're right if I do that. And
yes, of course. Yes, yeah, definitely.
So she started off about pay. She said, it's something I feel strongly about because money wasn't my reason for coming into nursing, but I do need to be able to live on my income. Before we talk about that, what can you just give a little bit of background about Janet? You know, what year she's in, what she was doing before. So she's a mature student nurse.
She is. So she's just about to, she's kind of completing her second year at the moment. She's about to go into her third year fairly soon, kind of January time. So she's completing it. She decided to go into nursing in COVID because she'd thought about going into nursing. It's her third time of thinking about going into nursing. It like literally tapped her on the shoulder, as she says, 3 times. And she thought, well, this time I'm not going to ignore it. Okay. But her circumstances changed to the degree where she was actually running a coffee shop. She was the owner of a coffee shop. It was doing, you know, really well. Janet, being Janet, was really chatty and very engaging, and she really enjoyed her work. She had employees as well. And then COVID came. And in, you know, one swift move, her cafe had to be closed. She was able to furlough some of her staff. She wasn't paid herself, but, you know, she then decided that it just wasn't a viable thing to go forward. And so as far as she was concerned, it was her opportunity then to go into nursing that had been knocking on her shoulder for all this time. And so at the age of 48, at that time, going on 49, obviously.
Quite young.
Yes. Oh, very young. Yes, very, very young. She made the decision to do that. And
so would you say it's a calling for her, nursing? Do you believe in that idea?
Oh,
That
that's
whole vocational thing.
such a big question. Okay, let me see if I can answer that. I'll answer it for myself because I'm not 100% sure if I can answer it totally for Janet
Sure.
without her being here.
So as a concept, because people do say this, don't they? I've said it.
They do. Okay, so there's a couple of things with it. First of all, it is quite devotional. You are devoted to your job in that you love it that much because it gives you that reward of being able to help and support people in their lives. So there's a devotional quality to it that could be perceived as so difficult to put it into words. It's a little bit like being called to be a nun. Gosh, the nurses are probably going to kill me for saying that, but this is maybe what they're thinking from, but before a long time ago. This is maybe where it came from.
Right,
I
yeah.
know Florence Nightingale's time or whatever. It was that whole kind of thing that there's a kind of a divine intervention here that brings you into this ability to be able to support and care for people. And that's what you do. That's your calling. You're set up in your life to do that. However, the difficulty with that has always been that it gets slightly mixed up with being like a servant, being subservient, maybe being less than, maybe being slightly immortal, not being, real, not necessarily having to make a living because you're on a calling.
It's not. It's the opposite of a professional, it being a profession.
Yes, and it's actually one of the reasons I think us nurses have struggled to be seen as a profession, because we were seen much more as handmaidens to health. We were there to be of service to other people, and that any kind of conditions and pay, etc., didn't come into it because you were doing it because you were called and out of love and devotion. So that's the kind of the background of it. But I personally feel that it shot us in the foot. I think this is part of the problem that we have today, right where we are right now.
Pay issue.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just read this bit from Janet as well, because I think it really chimes with what you've just been saying. So she said in that, I mean, you know this, you read the email, but Janet said, it seems to me that there is this common perception that people become nurses for compassionate reasons, and that our motivation is to help people and give back to society, etc., which I'm sure is true for most nurses. But somehow those sentiments then don't sit well next to financial considerations. In recent times, when the discussion turned to what level of pay increase nurses needed, there was a sharp intake of breath at the figure. And I kind of think that it's this perception, isn't it? The perception, what is the perception that we have of nurses? Like you say, are they handmaidens for doctors
Well, they certainly were. They were in the early days.
Okay.
And I think the difficulty is, have we been able to change that in the 21st century?
But now they're professional graduates, aren't they? They're required to go to university.
Of course, yes. And obviously, in my day that wasn't the case, but it certainly is now. I think maybe the words that we always use in our language to depict how things are have really big consequences. Like, for example, the other word that's used an awful lot is, oh my goodness, nurses are angels. It's actually an endearing term. But then if you unravel that a little bit and you think about it, you would think, well, actually, angels are something different. They don't need to be paid for what they do because they're angels. I know it sounds a bit strange, but I think it adds to the issue.
Yeah, I remember when, when you and I were chatting about you coming to work with us, and I was looking at those animated characters that we have on the site. which I want to ditch completely now. And at the time, I think we had little cloaks on them like superheroes.
Yeah.
And I asked what you thought about that, and you said ditch it, because I suppose, like you say, words and iconography create an impression. And if somebody is a superhero, then they don't need to be paid. You don't pay Batman. He just does it for free.
Absolutely right. That's exactly the thing. And that's really the crux of the problem. That,
What
perception? There's a lot of things going on here, but that's
so.
the perception. And it's going to take a really big kind of mindset shift to change that. I know a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last year has been very much about empowering nurses and healthcare support workers to take a stand for themselves,
to
stand up and be counted and to use their voice. And that's kind of part of this. That's really what, I mean, I guess this is what the call to action in terms of the strike is all about as well. That's
because they're doing this, they're striking not because on the surface, you're not saying we're striking because we're perceived incorrectly.
No.
But I think you're right, that's behind this. I think things have reached critical mass.
Yes, literally.
So they're striking because a number of things, but pay has fallen in real terms since 2010 by something like 20%.
Yeah, definitely.
It hasn't kept up with the private sector.
Yeah. And like Janet said in her email, living is still something that everybody has to do. And we have heard so many stories of nurses that are going to food banks, that are not being able to pay their mortgage, that are not necessarily being able to put fuel in the car, because in real terms, they have lost money.
I read today that Wes Streeting, the shadow Health and Social Care Secretary, was visiting hospitals that actually have food banks for staff in them.
Shocking, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so can we come back to that point, because there's something I want to add. I'm not sure it's the right time. No, not about food banks, just about the well-being part of the living, cost of living crisis, how that's affecting nurses in such a big way. But it's it again ties into very much what Janet was saying, that nobody quite understands exactly what it's like for nurses, but patients are starting to understand. And when you ask about the strike and is it about pay and conditions, yes it is, but it's not just about that.
No.
I'm not speaking for every nurse, obviously, but from my point of view, from what I've heard from everybody, the strike is also very much about patient safety. And that, to a lot of people out there, will seem contradictory, because what you're potentially going to do is, if you're going to walk off the ward and be on strike, you're putting your patients at risk.
I was going to talk about this, the sense of guilt. This is why they've not striked before, isn't it?
Yes. But it's got so critical in terms of patient safety that unless they take a stand for this, mainly due to staff shortages, due to COVID, due to burnout, due to people leaving the profession, unless they take a stand for the fact that they're not even on their knees, they're actually crawling into work. That's what it's going to be like very, very soon. It's getting worse and worse, that they have to take a stand for patient safety, because the patients are the most important people to nurses and healthcare support workers. They are there for their patients. And so that's the other reason. They realise they actually have no other choice but to do this.
Yeah. I mean, I just in my notes here, I've written too many notes, so I've got too many pieces of paper here to go through. But I made a little note, which was why now, and I wanted to ask. It's kind of like, is it a perfect storm? Really, is it due to the cost of living, the economics of it, or is it due to the immense stress that nurses face as a result of the staff shortage? Or is it the combination of all these things and they've reached the critical point where it's just like enough is enough?
Yeah, literally all of those things. And it's compounded even further by a resurgence in COVID and lots of other illnesses coming back that we haven't seen because we haven't had, you know, people mixing like they have been. So novavirus is a big problem. There's lots of different flus out there. Unfortunately, patients are going into hospital and coming back out with COVID as well. The social care system is just not able to cope at all. You know, there's all these things that are going on all at once. And that's why it is the perfect storm.
Yeah. And I think this strike action, it's not just about the money that goes into a nurse's bank account each month. I think, and the reason that there seems to be public support of this, YouGov poll gave 65% of, you know, the public support in it, saying, yes, we support the strike action. I think it's because the public feel that nurses aren't supported. And as taxpayers, you know, we have expectations on service care from the NHS that have to be met, and they're not being met at the moment because of the staff shortage. And one of the key drivers of the staff shortage, and I think there are three key drivers, there's lots and lots of detail, but three key drivers are pay, Brexit, and I did write the other one down, for the student bursary, which we'll talked about earlier. You know, if you think, and those are all decisions that have been taken by the Conservative government, all of those. You know, the Conservative government decided to have a vote on Brexit, and that led to an exodus of EU nurses, which we're now trying to fill, or, you know, we can't fill that. 47,000 unfilled nursing vacancies.
Yeah.
Under Jeremy Hunt, which is interesting because he's now the new Chancellor, under Jeremy Hunt's watch as Health Secretary, we ditched the nursing bursary. So we're straddling nurses with debt just to go through, you know, £30,000 worth of debt, I think Janet said, to be trained as a nurse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the pay issue. So I suppose the point I'm making is, you know, it's not just about money for nurses. This is about us having the patient care that I think we expect. And nurses can't deliver it because there are not enough nurses on the wards.
No, and that's what crushes them. That's the perfect word. It crushes them not to be able to deliver that care. And you have to imagine how that feels after maybe 13 hours at work, getting back and forward to work and going home and knowing, well, actually having everything going in your head. Did I do that? Did I hand that over? You know, because you're so short staffed that you're having to do the job of 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And that is like, I mean, I'm just going to give you a little snapshot. That is likely to keep you awake because you're going to be worried about it. You're then going to be really kind of upset on yourself because you haven't in any shape or form delivered the care that person deserves and needs, because you're just not superhuman enough to do that. You've kind of skirted around the edges. And then you go back the next day to repeat it all again. So the other thing that's happening there is that from the patient's point of view, they are then encountering staff that are broken, exhausted. They're going to be emotional. They're going to be maybe a little bit short. I don't mean in stature, you know, because, you know, they're at the end of their tether.
Yeah.
And these are people who are incredibly vulnerable and need to be in a space where they can heal and that the energy is good for them. And because the nurses are literally holding it together like glue, it's so fragile that it has an impact. It has an effect on the patients as well, because they're feeling what's going on. And then they're worried, am I ever going to get out of here? If I do get out, am I going to get the care I need? I mean, it's just, it goes on and on and on.
There's an emotional impact on patients,
huge,
as well as possibly not being given the clinical care that they, I mean, is that a consideration as well? Is that real?
Definitely. I mean, it's, you know, care is given in every single way. It's totally holistic. It's 360 degrees. But, you know, in an ideal world, I mean, maybe that ideal world was back when I was training back in the 80s, you know, where you actually had the time to do the right things for the right person, you know, and you were able to spend quality time, get to know people, understand their needs. You know, now it's kind of like a ferocious cycle.
There's no time for that.
No time for that. And that's just purely down to staff shortages. And I know I'm bringing that back to our conversation, and that is because of sickness, COVID, you know, all the bits and pieces that we discussed, but also because people are leaving because they've just literally had enough, and they don't feel valued or recognised in their roles. And so that's the other reason that they're going.
So are we agreed then in our little union here? Are we agreed that the government has to get a grip on pay, or we will not solve the staffing crisis? And if we don't solve the staffing crisis, we won't solve all of these issues. And the NHS will, I mean, what will happen to the NHS if they don't solve the staffing crisis?
Go to hell in a it'll go to hell in a handcart.
Sorry?
Honestly. It'll go to hell in a handcart.
Yeah. Well, it's going to become too expensive. There's a bit by Polly Toynbee I want to read in a minute, but let's look at these, because I love these figures. Well, I hate them, but they're staggering. So this is all about the staffing crisis, the cost.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the emotional impact on the nurses themselves and on patient care.
And on patients, yeah.
But let's just imagine that we're dispassionate financial directors of an NHS trust, and all we're interested in is the bottom line and the figures. Well, let's have a look at this. So the total bill for agency nurses between 2017 and 2021, 4.3 billion. So we're paying for that. And until we solve the staffing crisis, we'll continue to pay for that. The cost of retention in the NHS. So if you know, because staff are leaving because they're stressed, 21 billion, amazing. The cost of recruiting a single overseas nurse, because we're doing a lot of that at the moment, because how much is it? It's gone up tenfold in a year just to try and cover this shortage. But the cost of recruiting from overseas is very expensive, and that's around 17,000. And you compare that against the 7,000 it would cost to give a 5% above inflation pay rise.
It's kind of like an upside down no-brainer, isn't it? I mean,
what did Janet keep saying? Topsy-turvy.
Topsy-turvy.
If you were just, you know, you're just a number cruncher. You'd look at this and say, we have to sort this out because this is not good economics. You know, if you're a business owner, you'd be all over this, sorting it out. The government have to get a grip.
Definitely.
Reintroduce nursing bursary, get more train, reintroduce the nursing bursary so you can start training more nurses.
And make it a really attractive profession to go into in terms of the pay and the benefits. Like any other industry where people are graduates, you know, where they incentivize the best people. You know, they pull in they have great big conferences and recruitment shows, and they literally take the very best people and they do attract them with money.
Well, I mean, the NHS is, I mean, they really, the benefits they offer, the pension is unbeatable. You know, in the private sector can't get close to the NHS pension. But they need to sort out, you know, flexible working. It's another big reason that nurses leave. So they're still doing 12-hour shifts?
Yes, unfortunately. Yes. I mean, personally, I would say they need to, it's probably a bit controversial, but they need to take the pension, sort the pension out. Doesn't need to be as good as it is, because at the rate we're going, when people get to pensionable age, they will be so tired, exhausted, potentially sick themselves from what they've had to put in over the last 20, 30 years of their life, that it won't matter about the pension. Why don't they just
more, but provide a lower pension.
Yes, like normal corporations, you know, why does it have to be so rich in terms of what happens at the end? Why don't we deal with today and how we're looking after people right now, rather than what happens in their pension pot in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time? Doesn't make any sense. Again, it's topsy-turvy.
I'll write an email to Steve Barclay, the Health Social Care Secretary, after this.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But the other thing that Janet brought up, and we had discussed previously in a Cup of Care, was this thought about how crazy it is that sports sponsorship, you know, just wearing
I like that.
an item.
No, shall I read that bit out? I've got it here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she said, as a society, nursing is just one of the jobs that highlights how priorities are misaligned. And there are many roles that are undervalued, yet they perform the most important functions in society.
Mm-hmm.
I've often said I'd happily wear a company logo on my nursing uniform for the sponsorship fees that go to sports people who earn twice and thrice more in 1 week than nurses earn in a year. It's a topsy-turvy world, isn't it?
Mm. And so I know it's a really big thing to sort out, because they would have to be the right kind of company for the NHS. But imagine if local businesses supported their local ICBs by, you know, sponsoring nurses. And yes, they had a logo or something on, or whatever, and they were aligned in terms of values and mission statements, etc., who these people were, so that that you know, everybody was aligned and worked together. But you know, that it's a win-win. I see that as a win-win. Imagine a very large corporation that's just wanting to be altruistic and wanting to support healthcare because they realize that everybody needs it. So they wanted to give back into the NHS, and so they sponsored lots of different things by.
Yeah, I get the idea. I'm not sure where it would sit with, you know, unions, probably feeling that it shouldn't be subsidising government spend and pay provided to nurses out of, you know, on their NHS pay scales.
I understand, but yeah, it's just a potential idea. It's a big ask. It's a big thing to sort out, but it is a solution.
I mean,
It's what we desperately need is solutions, because nobody else is coming up with it. You know, people aren't coming up with anything.
what I took away from that as well is the, you know, the philosophical notion. You know, how do we as a society value nursing? What values do we put on it? What is it worth to us? Do we think it is important, you know, and are we prepared to pay for it?
Yeah, and as you know, with our work, when we created the academy and we looked at all the reasons that nurses were leaving, we realized that kind of paying conditions as one of our tenets of you know, retention was a sticky situation. And the way we approached it is that we decided that we wanted to give the power back to nurses and healthcare support workers, that it wasn't about the fact that they weren't valued in what they did.
Yeah.
You know, the work that they had to take that value for themselves. They had to understand their intrinsic value of what they did, and feel so good about it and feel so empowered that no matter what the pay was or what was going on, they still felt, you know, worthy and valuable and empowered enough to get themselves to work every
on
day.
their actual worth.
Yes.
I mean, there is that, and I think you and I both believe that it's important that is said and that is stressed. However, as Janet says, you know, it comes down to needing to pay your mortgage or your rent and buying.
Yes. And this is where we're at, isn't it? And that sticky situation has just got a whole lot worse, really. And it is worrying, because I don't know 2023 is going to hold in the spring. It's a very difficult time.
Yeah.
But I think this is why the nurses are taking a stand on being counted as saying, like, enough is enough. This is critical. We have to do something. There is no better wealth than health. And, let's make sure that we make this happen.
Yeah. I think just a fact correction earlier about nurses joining the NMC register from outside the EU. I wanted to get those figures correct. So I think this is actually from one of our own articles. Almost half of the new nursing staff joining the NMC register in the year to March 2022 were from overseas. 22,745 people from outside the EU and EEA joined the register. That's up from just 9,000 the previous year. And, this is not the long-term, I keep saying this is not the long-term solution to the staffing crisis. And neither is, the reliance on temps. The long-term solution, I really think, is sorting out this pay issue and therefore attracting more people into nursing, which will sort out the staffing issue, which will hopefully begin to allow nurses to do the work that you were saying a minute ago that they want to be doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a gentleman called Professor Philip Banfield. He works for the BMA, and he said that he felt at the moment what was happening was a little bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
And I thought, as an analogy, that's very true. So much time and attention goes into a new policy or a new way of doing something, but they're not getting to the crux of the.
Is that because you speak to a lot of nurses? Is that how? Do you think that's how they would see it as well?
Yeah, that's what people are saying. There's so they don't necessarily feel undervalued by like their line manager or what above. They realize that this is coming from government and that we're in this kind of total false economy with the situation, but that I think this is why they have decided to go, we've decided to go on strike, because goodwill, which is what's fueled nurses and healthcare support workers forever, is just starting to run out. The energy of goodwill is just not there. It needs, like you say, it needs a complete overhaul on how the bands are paid and making things a lot more attractive. And there's so much extra as well to do with conditions, like you say, flexible working. And surely we've got to really at the same time address these 12-hour shifts. I mean, there will always be some people that would like to do that, but there are plenty of other people that don't. I think being flexible, you've got to be able to offer a whole raft of different hours to suit people's lifestyles.
I don't think in any job you can give your all for 12 hours. I don't work 12 hours. I might work 12 hours through the day, but not in one shift. And also, this is my business, so I would never expect an employee to work a 12-hour shift. You can't.
Those 12 hours tend to be constantly on your feet.
Yeah.
You might have had one break in the day, and that won't have been lunchtime. It might be 3 o'clock, because that's the only time you can grab it. And not having proper pit stops for yourself because you're just so super busy. One drug round going into the other because it's just crazy. So when I say 12 hours, that is like a full-on 12 hours.
Yes,
at breakneck speed.
See, I guess oftentimes a nurse will arrive on a ward and see that they don't have enough colleagues, so they've got to do more than usual. They're doing more than usual for 12 hours. Long time, isn't it? Long time to be sprinting.
Yeah. And so when I've spoken with people, the conversations that we've had around this is that Obviously, safety is always the most important thing for
Patient
the
safety.
patients and also for the nurses too. But they aren't superhuman. They haven't got the cape on.
Mm.
They're not angels. They're not going to just fly off and everything's going to be okay. They are human beings, but they can only do so much.
Yeah.
So it's getting into that whole mindset of leaving the shift, making it like a closure somehow, going through a ritual or a routine to close the day off. It takes a bit of practice so that you don't keep on thinking things, but just knowing that what you've been able to do, you've done your best at, and that's enough.
Yeah.
As long as you've passed over all the things you haven't been able to do, then that's okay.
One of the, I don't know if you heard this, but the other day on the radio or in a broadcast, I read it, so I don't know where it originated from. And I can't remember the name of the guy in government that said it, but I'll look it up in a second. When asked about strike action, what would happen if when nurses go on strike? So it's not if, it's when. It's before Christmas, I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
He made it sound like it's not going to be a problem. So we've, kind of like, it's something like along the lines, I'll paraphrase, we've rehearsed this, it's going to all operate like
I
a
saw
well-oiled
that. We
machine.
have a contingency plan.
What the fuck does he mean? What contingency plan? Who? Are you going to go and step in? You still got an MC pin, haven't you, Nikki?
Yes, that's I have. Did I tell you that's what I'm doing?
It's like the COVID, are they going to get COVID cover for it? All the people that, what
and I cannot tell you how many people would have been annoyed and upset by that, because if there was a contingency plan it's supposedly in place, why haven't they been using that with all the shortages?
Okay, I can't remember. Let's look it up. I'll look it up in a minute. So I wonder what the contingency plan is and when they intend to activate it for the 47,000 unfilled nursing vacancies. Let's get that contingency plan going.
Yeah. Just trying to lay general public spheres on what's
it's so demeaning, isn't it?
Yes.
And these are the people that are going to have to sit on the other side of the table with RCN, who are Pat Cullen, intelligent people who are looking after their nurses. And these government officials are going to have to sit around the table and try and come up with something that is reasonable when they're starting from such an unreasonable and irrational position as saying it's all going to operate like a well-oiled machine.
Well, without a shadow of a doubt.
I hate to tell this person, it's already not operating like a well-oiled machine.
So before they get to the table, this is what I feel should happen. Even before they get anywhere near that table, they should be donning some scrubs and doing a couple of 12-hour shifts with some nurses.
Yeah.
Just shadowing, just literally walking around with them for a couple of days, and then they can come to the table and then let's see what they have to say, because that's critical, isn't it? Yeah. It's like, people moving all these incredibly important things without having a Scooby-Doo as to the impact that has on everyday people.
Yeah. You go and do the meds round in an understaffed mental health hospital. Give that a go. All the other things you've got to be doing. It's so patronising, isn't it?
Yes, so patronising. So yes, that would most definitely have. It's just like rubbing salt into the wound the whole time.
Let's name and shame. So I'm just going to.
Yes, I read it as well, and I don't remember his name. I think it was.
I put in well-oiled machine.
It's a government minister, isn't it?
It was, yeah. The government has said it has contingency plans for dealing with a strike by nurses. It's a shame they don't have contingency plans for the staffing crisis.
That's exactly what I just said. Yeah.
Cabinet Officer Minister Oliver Dowden said that in the event of strikes, the NHS would prioritise the most essential services. We have well-oiled contingencies in place. I mean, it's probably bollocks. They probably don't have well-oiled contingencies. They probably don't even have cranky, unoiled contingencies in place.
Yeah. Oh, the
It's
only
hard.
contingencies that they'll have are the two that you've mentioned already. That will be our colleagues, our lovely colleagues, our international colleagues that have come across to this country to help us, and also agency nursing. And there's nothing wrong with either of those two sectors, but as we've discussed, it's cost so much money, and all that money could have been used in the first place to give
Yeah,
nurses the pay
yeah.
rises they needed. So I'm assuming that those are his contingency plans, because there is nothing
I
else.
don't think temp nurses will break the strike. They won't go in to break the strike, will they? I don't think.
So how do you mean when you say break the strike?
Will a temp nurse go in to replace a striking nurse? I don't think that. Do you know what I mean? You remember? I mean, I was young when it was happening, the miners' strikes. You know that it was important that others didn't go in. I think to replace those that were on strike.
I don't know the answer to that question. My gut feeling is yes, they probably will if they are incentivized with even more cash as an agency nurse.
Watch this space, I suppose.
I
was talking to Maxine.
Doesn't make it right at all, but
I was talking to Maxine the other day, you know, about temps, and I think it's important that I don't malign it. You know, it's really important. There'll always be a need for temp nurses, and for some nurses, it's additional income. It's great. For other nurses, it provides flexibility they can't get elsewhere. For many good reasons, nurses choose temping, and you know, again, temping agencies provide vital cover. But as Maxine said in just one word, it's lost equilibrium. There's not a balance anymore.
no, same person doing exactly the same job,
Yeah,
with like practically double the pay.
having been paid for by taxpayers to get to a point where they then go and work for sometimes the same employer as an agency nurse on 2.5 times pay, and it's out of balance. It's too expensive. There's too great a reliance on temp nurses, and you know, put aside you know, the patient care. No, they're qualified nurses. You know, there's no question about the patient care that they're able to provide. But how does it impact morale on a ward if you're working alongside somebody that you know is earning 2.5 times your?
Yeah, it has an emotional toll. It really does. And again, that emotional toll will have an impact on the work that you're able to deliver, because there may be an underlying slight kind of resentment or bitterness there. I mean, there might not be, but you know, who knows? But I think the thing to mention with it is that obviously with the cost of living crisis, and that nurse on that shift just thinking, holy cow, how am I going to pay my mortgage this month? And you've got somebody earning, I don't know, 25 quid or 30, let's say, doing exactly the same job as you. It's not going to take too long until that nurse starts thinking, do you know what? I don't think I've got any choice. I've actually got to cross over and do that job.
Yeah.
You know, so there's always going to be this kind of to and froing.
You know,
but the problem with that is that you're not getting the continuity of care.
Yeah.
And that has, again, another huge impact.
It has an impact not just on patients, but on the permanent staff.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So,
you know, and I think this is, you know, we have to have this discussion about temping. You know, we run a website and there are temp agencies advertising on our site. You know, I'm not gonna say that they shouldn't exist. And also, like I say, there is a real need for these organisations, but it's out of balance. And I think we need to start having these honest discussions. You know, what's not working, what hasn't worked in the past, how do we fix it? You know, and I think it's clear Brexit did not work well for nursing numbers in the UK. Okay, so we have to fix that. We're currently going outside of the EU to find nurses because we're going to those countries where I've learned their nurse training closely resembles ours, or more closely resembles ours, like the Philippines. Okay, so but how can we work with maybe our European neighbours to see if we can provide better pathways to bring those EU nurses back that we've lost.
Yeah.
And we have to have an honest conversation about temps. You know, what do we feel is an adequate level of temp cover? How do we get back? How do we redress that situation? I think we need to start, the government has to start getting a grip and has to have honest conversations and admit honestly to itself that it's got to make some changes, and pay is another one. And actually, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, Polly Toynbee pointed this out in The Guardian today, when he was chairing the Health and Social Care Committee, I think is the name, after being the health minister. He was arguing that in order to meet the demands of a growing population, in order to meet the health and social care demands of a growing population, we have to fund it properly. So now he's Chancellor, as Polly Toynbee was saying, he can't now go back on that recommendation. He needs to start funding it, and he's the one who's holding the purse strings. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he and Steve Barclay, the new Health and Social Care Cabinet Secretary, work this one out between them. They're going to have to get around the table with the RCN.
Yeah, after they've done a few shifts, that is, remember?
Yeah.
I was speaking to a nurse yesterday, and we were having this conversation about enhanced payments in the NHS.
What's that?
Which, well, I need to actually look into it a little bit further, because I have to admit that I had forgotten about it. But it's not necessarily agency rates, but there is sometimes at the weekend the opportunity to be able to kind of like double your hourly rate as an enhanced payment, just because you've come in at short notice. So that's one really positive thing that the NHS are doing. And I just thought that's absolutely brilliant. That's the way it should be. You're growing from within. It's your own people, and you're giving them that. And she said, but it's not working. And I said, why? And then I realized why. It was kind of a stupid question. Because people are so exhausted, right, that even the attraction of having, double your pay on a Sunday, which you desperately, or any day of the week for that matter, but you desperately need some time off just to catch up with life admin, to have a rest, to restore, it's a very, very difficult thing, because yes, the money is potentially being offered, but people are not in the right place to be able to step up, because that's coming back again to the shortages of staff.
Yeah.
And they're all intrinsically linked, aren't they? So I just thought it was a very interesting thing, and it's great to know that the NHS are doing that, the enhanced payments. But, as another nurse said to me the other day, I value my well-being more than money. She was not going to give up her day off that she has with her husband. He works as well, but he also manages to have that day. They do things together. They rest, restore, they have a really good day. And she says, I have to do that so that I can come back to my patients the day after, fresh and ready to work again. And I just thought, wow, that's fantastic. And she's, just at the beginning of her career, and she's taking her stand for herself, where she puts her well-being above what she's paid.
Yeah.
But all of these things all need to work together. Obviously, they can't work separately. They're all one, and they're all the same thing. But I don't know. I think we're going to have to start praying soon. It's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about student nurses and whether they are still supernumerary.
Yeah.
Because if they're included within the staffing numbers on a ward, are they paid fully for that?
They're not paid at all.
So they're not paid at all.
They have 2,300 unpaid learning hours in 3 years. They're not paid at all.
And do you think they are supernumerary means, for those out there that don't know what it means, is, so say you need 12 nurses on a ward for adequate patient care, the student nurse will be a 13th member. They're not included within the figure required to give adequate patient care. That's the definition, isn't it?
Yes, but I believe
in addition to the usual numbers.
it's changed a little bit. There's whatever's happening, they're not being paid, that's for sure. But they are being utilised heavily.
They're doing work.
They're doing work heavily.
And so how would you feel about that if that was you?
Well, actually, this is a conversation that I've also had with Janet, because with all the figures that we've worked out with the 20% down on real term figures of what nurses are being paid, it equates to not being paid a whole day, 1 day a week, every month.
Right.
Nurses not being paid for that whole day. That's in real term costs of that 20% decline. Yeah. So that's kind of very similar to the same what you just said about that. Yeah, of course, that's totally wrong. And we've kind of already worked out that where Janet is in her training, she should be equivalent to a nursing associate, let's say, a band 4. So yeah, it's disgraceful.
It's been really hard, isn't it, for the I think people need to be aware of this and know that student nurses on a ward aren't being paid for the work they're doing. I'm sure that some people will be surprised that I think, Janet said, actually, patients are astounded that as a student nurse, we only get a small bursary. They used to get a full bursary until 2015, when George Osborne, Chancellor, and Jeremy Hunt, Health Care Secretary, got rid of it. The rest of our income comes from student loans and other jobs we may have. Secondly, we actually have to pay to do our degree to the tune of almost £30,000. About that getting other jobs, Polly Toynbee, I'm going to read this bit. She made a good point in an article today, a column today in The Guardian, and I'll add a link when we publish this to that. Not only are nurses leaving the profession, which we've already talked about, but new entrants have fallen by a record 8% in the past year. Recruiting students who face the prospect, she says, £50,000 worth of debt, gets harder when half the new recruits' time is spent working on wards unpaid, which is what we've just been talking about. Though in theory, these student nurses are supernumerary. While under instruction, they are increasingly used as spare hands caring for patients, doing the same exhausting shifts, but paying instead of being paid. Do you think of it like that? They're paying that 30,000, however much it is, to study. So they're paying to work. It's weird, isn't it?
Dreadful. And the other thing that worries me is, the mental health aspect, the emotional toil that takes, because, if you hold that resentment and bitterness within your body and your mind, it has to manifest in some shape or form. And what I mean by that is obviously the fact that you are working like Billio, like everybody else on that ward, but you are not being paid for it. Yeah. Where is that right at all? Yeah. And so, they must be questioning, can I do this? Is it worth it? Am I going to get through this?
What is this industry that I'm about to move into full-time employment in? Because if you think about other undergraduates, well, when I was an undergraduate, I was able to I worked at a golf club, did washing up, worked in a pizza restaurant. But as Polly Toynbee said, unlike other students, nurses work too hard to take bar jobs to cover living costs. When I was a student, I didn't have to go and work, somewhere. My future, I thought at that time, was in publishing. I didn't have to go and do placements at publishers and work for nothing, doing actual work. I was able to, in my spare time, either I could choose to do more reading, or I could choose to go and get a paid job, or I could choose to go, you know, take leisure time. Whereas a nurse's degree is not like that. It's not like any other degree, is it?
No, and just to show the commitment level, our Janet in Cup of Care, she, you know, as you just said, with a placement with 12-hour shifts, while she's on placement, she cannot work and do anything else. It
No.
is so full on. She's
Yeah.
exhausted. So we're coming
Yeah.
back again to the same old, you know, spiral of exhaustion. But when she's not on placement and she's studying, she does NHSP. So she works for NHS Professionals, which is kind of the internal agency within the NHS. And she absolutely loves that. And it's total, you know, kudos to her, and such a commitment level of, you know, being a nurse of the future, that she chooses not to work in a bar or whatever. She still wants to be within her professional capacity as a trainee nurse and learn as much as she can and get paid for that.
I think the government preys on this. They know that people that wish to and choose to become nurses, well, like you're saying, they very much want to provide care. They very much want to do that job. And I think the government chooses to take that desire for granted.
I agree with you.
And that's why they took away the nursing bursary, and they try to claim that it's just, well, we, you know, why should nurses benefit when other undergraduates don't benefit from the same? But what's hidden in that statement is the fact that a nursing degree is not like any other degree, for the reasons we just talked about.
Yeah.
It's actually like an onboarding training program for the NHS.
Yes, it is.
I mean, lots of students don't know you can actually go on placement in private healthcare. You don't have to go in the NHS, but lots of students do not know that. So most of them do go on placement within the NHS. So it's actually like an NHS training program.
Yes, it is. Like
you're paying 30 grand to do it. It's brilliant, isn't it? Imagine if, like, let's pick any commercial sector business. Let's pick Toyota. Okay, it'd be like Toyota having free help on the factory line. They got a bunch of people on the factory line putting cars together, but Toyota don't pay. Those people have actually paid themselves 30 grand to do it.
Oh, Matt, let's do this analogy. Literally, let's write this analogy out so that general public gets to understand.
The analogy stands up, I think, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And nobody told those people on the shop floor of Toyota that they don't actually have to go to Toyota. They can go to other organisations. So the NHS benefits massively, and the government doesn't pay for it. So you end up, your first day as an NHS employer, you're straddled with 30 grand's worth of debt, having provided many hours to the NHS already at that point.
That goodwill just ran out.
What's that, sorry?
The goodwill just totally ran out.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, you'd have some sour grapes about that, wouldn't you? You think,
yeah,
really that's
the bit I'm worried about. The sour grapes is the bit that I'm worried about, how that impacts people's emotional well-being and general mental health ongoing, because it's compounding constantly. And it has to come out in some way. I'm worried about that for people.
You know, I don't know how long we've been talking now, about an hour. You know, there is a lot more to this issue than just getting a bit more on your bank balance at the end of the month to cover the increasing costs. And that is an issue as well, to cover the increasing costs of things. You know, the RCN is they would like 5% on top of inflation. But it's like we've been saying, it's not just about, it's the way you're treated. It's the way that from being a student right through your profession as a nurse in the NHS, you kind of feel that you're treated. You know, it's not just about that recognition in terms of pay, it's all the other things that contribute towards that. It's arriving on your ward in the morning and once again, you know, 4 staff down, here's another 12 hours of really heavy work. It's all of those factors built in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we do what we do, isn't it? Because we're supporting these healthcare workers to,
Yeah.
you know, no matter how beep it is out there, you know, they're still human beings, and they're still incredible giving people, and it's just about time that they actually had the time of receiving,
And
because
it's why
they've
they
given
respond
so
so
much.
well to what you're doing, because somebody's just listening to them.
Yeah.
And also their managers have allowed them to have the time to do that, to stop and chat to you as well.
Yeah. No, it you know, it doesn't it's not a magic wand, although I do pretend this is my magic wand sometimes, but it you know, it's just small little tiny shifts where you feel that you're being listened to, that you have the opportunity to be able to get what's on your mind out, and try and find a solution focused way forward. There's always an option, there's always more than one option, so it's looking at all the things that are available to them in terms of, you know, their whole career, which is really what we're talking about today, and also their well-being, which is what we're also talking about today. These things matter so much. So it does
So
feel like a privilege to be able to support people in this way, but we certainly have got I think you know, we've got so much more to come on this. This is the concern.
I know that of the huge audience that will be watching this, two of them will be Steve Barclay, Health Secretary, and Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor, and they'll be watching this and making a decision based on this. So what would our message be to them? Should they award a pay rise for nurses? Should they look at that?
Yeah, they absolutely should, because at some point they're going to get poorly themselves. We're all human. We all need healthcare. We need the best healthcare in the world, which is what the NHS represents. But
And if
you know,
they don't want to do it for the nurses themselves, they just need to do it so the figures start looking a bit better on paper, don't
they
they?
need to do it for themselves. At some point, they're going to need healthcare.
Right. Okay.
Everybody's going to need healthcare. That this is the bottom line now. And if we don't sort this out, there's just not going to be healthcare.
If they believe in the NHS, if they believe in a national health service, they have to do this.
Yeah, yeah. They have to show goodwill, and you know, it's time for the nurses and the healthcare support workers to receive, because they've spent a whole lifetime of giving, and it's now their time to receive. If there's any hope.
And following, you know, the pandemic, and I mean, even 10 years ago during the Olympics, you know, the NHS was heralded. You know, this, I think the Brits love the NHS, don't they? And
they're very proud of it. Yeah.
Proud of it. And I think this will come with public support, these strikes, won't they? You think?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you just have to be touched by somebody that's been in hospital, or, you know, is going in hospital. We all know people that are in that situation, and, you know, at one point, as I keep saying, we'll be there ourselves for whatever reason. And you just want to be cared for. And it's getting to the point where you can't necessarily guarantee that, you know, that's the crazy thing. So something major has to shift.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for your time. That was a good chat.
It's great. No,
I think we sorted it all out.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? It's so important to be able to express how you feel, and we need more and more people to be doing this. And you know, people are not alone. That's the other thing. You know, they have to work collectively. One voice is great, but many voices are also what's needed. So no one's alone here. We're there for everybody, and you know, collectively, we hope to make a difference.
Yeah. So we'll be publishing this video as an article, And so we would definitely invite a response and people can comment. And I know they always do when we talk about pay. It's such an emotive and crucial and important subject. Yeah, and if they want to also comment about how they feel emotionally about this subject, we can reply to that. And I'm sure you'd be happy to reply.
I'd be delighted to. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important that people express how they feel.
Yeah.
You know, as I say, for me, it's a really big concern how so much of this is compounding people's emotional well-being and mental health.
And if they comment and it's clear that they don't want us to comment back publicly, you'll be happy to get back in touch with them you can direct message them back, can't you? And
of course, and anybody can message me anytime. It's Nikki, Nikki at Nurses.co.uk. So please just reach out and I will come back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nikki. I'll speak to you tomorrow, I'm sure.
Pleasure, Matt. Thank you so much for asking me. It's really, really good.
Oh, and thanks, Janet, as well.
Oh, I will definitely. And so that's the other thing to say, we'll be going into a little bit more detail on this on our Cup of Care podcast that will be running on the 30th of November, but it'll come out a little bit later.
Christmas edition.
There'll be another one before Christmas. Okay. Yeah. And then just one more after that, because that'll be our year, would you believe? So time's flown. So yeah. Yes, thank you, Janet, for your insights. Amazing.
Great. Take care, Nikki.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.